In 274 AD, a Roman soldier received his monthly pay and noticed something strange. The coin in his hand looked like silver. It shone like silver, but when he rubbed it between his fingers, the silver flaked off like old paint. Underneath, cheap bronze. He said nothing. What could he say? The coin still bought bread. The bread still kept him alive. And the empire, the greatest empire the world had ever seen, still stretched from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Britain. Everything looked fine. Everything was not fine. What that soldier was holding wasn't just a debased coin. It was a receipt for centuries of bad decisions, desperate rulers, and a financial system quietly collapsing from the inside, long before anyone realized there was nothing left to collapse. This is the story of how Rome went bankrupt, and why nobody noticed until it was already too late. Part 1. The machine that built an empire. To understand how Rome fell apart financially, you first need to understand how it held together. The Roman economy was not complicated. It was, in fact, breathtakingly simple, and that simplicity was both its greatest strength and its most fatal weakness. Rome ran on conquest. Every time Roman legions marched into a new territory and won, they brought back three things: land, slaves, and treasure. The land was redistributed or taxed. The slaves were put to work in mines, farms, and workshops. And the treasure, gold, silver, jewels, stripped from foreign temples and royal vaults, flooded back to Rome and kept the whole machine running. This worked brilliantly for centuries. By the time of Augustus Caesar, around the year 1 AD, Rome controlled an empire generating more economic output than any political entity in human history up to that point. The treasury was full. The currency was solid. A silver denarius, Rome's standard coin, was almost entirely silver, around 95% pure. Soldiers were paid. Roads were built. Grain was distributed to the poor. Games were held in massive stadiums to keep the public entertained and satisfied. The system worked because new money kept flowing in from the outside. But here is the problem with building your economy on conquest. Eventually, you run out of places to conquer. By the 2nd century AD, Rome had reached what historians call its natural borders: the Rhine and Danube rivers in the north, the Sahara in the south, the Euphrates in the east. Pushing further was possible, but the returns weren't worth the cost. The territories beyond those borders were too poor, too remote, or too fiercely defended to generate the kind of wealth Rome needed. The machine that built the empire had run out of fuel, and Rome's rulers, instead of redesigning the machine, decided to do something far simpler. They started lying about the fuel. Part 2. The slow poison. The debasement of Roman currency didn't happen overnight. It happened the way most financial disasters happen, gradually, then suddenly. It started small. An emperor facing a budget shortfall would instruct the mint to add a tiny bit more copper to the silver coins. Just a fraction, barely noticeable. The coins still looked silver. They still felt silver, but they were slightly less silver than before. This extra copper meant the mint could produce more coins from the same amount of silver. More coins meant more money to pay the soldiers, fund the wars, finance the palaces. Problem solved, for now. The next emperor did the same thing, and the one after that. By 100 AD, the denarius had dropped to around 85% silver. Still mostly silver, still credible. By 200 AD, goodbye. By 265 AD, less than 5%. That soldier rubbing the silver flaking off his coin. He was living at the end point of a process that had been running for nearly 3 centuries. A slow, quiet, relentless dilution of the money supply that no single emperor had started, and no single emperor could stop. But here's where it gets truly fascinating and truly dark. The Romans were not stupid. Merchants, traders, and ordinary citizens figured out what was happening. They could feel it. Prices for basic goods began rising. Not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently, year after year, decade after decade. A basket of wheat that cost 1 denarius in the reign of Augustus cost 20 denarii 3 centuries later. Not because wheat had become scarcer, because the money had become worth less. This is inflation, and Rome was experiencing one of the worst inflationary spirals in ancient history. Merchants responded by hoarding real goods, grain, olive oil, metal tools, instead of holding coins. Tax collectors, paid in increasingly worthless currency, demanded payment in kind. Actual grain, actual livestock, actual labor. The sophisticated monetary economy Rome had built began slowly reverting to primitive barter. And yet the empire looked the same. The roads were still there. The legions were still marching. The Senate was still debating. The Colosseum was still staging spectacles. The infrastructure of power remained, but the financial foundation underneath it had become hollow. Part 3. The crisis nobody could ignore. The 3rd century AD is known to historians as the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 285 AD, a span of just 50 years, Rome had over 50 different emperors. 50 emperors in 50 years. Most of them died violently. This wasn't just political chaos, it was financial collapse in action. Because every time a new emperor took power, he needed to buy loyalty. And the price of loyalty, in Rome, had always been paid in coin. The soldiers who made and unmade emperors expected payment for their support. New gifts. New bonuses. New promises. With the treasury running on empty and coins worth almost nothing, each new emperor printed, or rather minted, more money, which made the inflation worse, which made the next emperor's financial situation more desperate, which required even more minting. A vicious cycle, spinning faster with every revolution. Meanwhile, the empire's external pressures were intensifying. Germanic tribes pressed harder against the northern borders. The Sassanid Persian Empire challenged Rome in the east. Keeping the military funded was not optional, it was existential. Without the legions there was no empire, and the legions, increasingly aware of their own power, demanded more. Diocletian, who became emperor in 284 AD, was sharp enough to see the problem clearly. He attempted what might be called the most ambitious price-fixing scheme in ancient history. The Edict on Maximum Prices, issued in 31 AD, which legally capped the price of hundreds of goods and services across the empire. Bread, wine, meat, wool, a day's labor. The cost of transporting goods by road or by sea. Diocletian set maximum legal prices for all of it. The penalty for charging more, death. The edict failed immediately. Merchants simply stopped selling. Why sell at a loss? Better to hide your goods, wait, trade on the black market, or move to a region where enforcement was weaker. The law existed. The market did not care. Diocletian's attempt to solve an economic crisis with legal force was not unique in history. It would not be the last time a government tried it, and it would not be the last time it failed spectacularly. Part 4. The end of the recipe. By the 4th and 5th centuries, the Western Roman Empire was not so much collapsing as dissolving. The tax base had shrunk as wealthy landowners, who had the political connections to secure exemptions, paid less and less. The burden fell on farmers and small traders, who had less and less to give. Tax evasion became endemic. Entire regions effectively stopped remitting revenue to the central government. Without revenue, the central government couldn't maintain the roads. Without roads, trade slowed. Without trade, tax revenue fell further. Another vicious cycle, reinforcing the first. The army, unable to be paid in reliable currency, was increasingly compensated in land. Soldiers became landowners. Generals became local warlords. The distinction between Roman military commander and Germanic chieftain became blurrier with every passing decade. When Alaric and his Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 AD, the first time the city had been captured in 800 years, the shock was psychological as much as military. Romans across the empire struggled to comprehend how this could have happened. The philosopher and theologian Augustine of Hippo, watching the news spread across North Africa, sat down and began writing a massive work attempting to explain it. He called it The City of God. It would take him 13 years to finish, but the financial answer was simpler than any theology. Rome had spent centuries borrowing from its own future, diluting its currency, deferring its problems, paying its bills with money that was worth less every year. And when the future finally arrived, when the bill finally came due, there was nothing left to pay it with. The greatest empire in Western history did not fall to barbarian swords alone. It was bankrupted first. That soldier rubbing the silver off his coin in 274 AD was holding the end of an era in his hand. He just didn't know it yet. Most people never do. Financial collapses rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with trumpets. They arrive quietly, in slightly lighter coins, in prices that seem a little higher than last year, in promises that feel a little hollower than before. The Romans weren't foolish. They were human. And humans, whether in ancient Rome or the modern world, have an extraordinary talent for believing that the system will hold together just a little longer. Until it doesn't. If you found this story worth your time, subscribe. Every week we follow the money through history, because the empires change, but the mistakes don't.